This is the SNES Classic natively running the original Quake, something I honestly never thought I would see. The console is currently 5 years old, coming up on 6. Now you would think that since it was released so long ago and it's almost just a fancy plug-and-play console, it would be mostly irrelevant as of now, right? I'm happy to say that is not the case. This thing still has relevance all the way in 2023, and that is due to its dedicated modding community. Recently, the said community has been able to expand on the console quite a lot. It's similar to why the PS Vita has taken on so much light in recent days. The fans simply found a way to make it into something more than it already is. That is almost the same idea here, but not in quite the same fashion. You'll see what I mean as the video goes on. But to restate, this sleek little device has way more uses to it now than it ever did on release. Today, we'll be exploring these uses as well as try to explore the community behind it. Let's get started. The true potential of the SNES Classic can really only be taken advantage of through the use of the modding community. Once you do that, the doors to all sorts of possibilities can open up for the small console. I would imagine most users of the console would have done so by now, seeing as, like I mentioned earlier, this year it'll be turning 6 years old. And while its regular capabilities are still very cool, there's a lot more that can be done with it. Right now you're seeing a prime example of this, with Quake being ran on it natively. Of course, that's only a tiny part of what you can do. There's actually a whole website dedicated to this. SNESclassicmods.com is what you'll be looking for those who want to begin expanding on their console's potential. It's filled with plenty of different things, many of which I had no idea the console was even capable of in the first place. It genuinely had me impressed. It has everything and is truly your friend when it comes to that sort of thing. As of writing this, it helped me install SNES Doom as well as SNES Wolfenstein on my device, and even if they are not perfect ports, I still appreciate the effort nonetheless. Today, we will be pretty much exploring the modded side of this console and seeing what more it can do. Now, of course, to properly take advantage of all this, you would need a Wii Classic or Pro controller, as the base SNES controller does not have enough buttons to cover everything as you can imagine. I ordered one, and it will take 3 days to arrive. Between now and those 3 days, I will be pretty much downloading every game or system I want on the SNES. This way, I can immediately get to playing games when the time comes. I'm pretty much just going to be testing various emulated consoles and some native games on the device. Mainly, I want to see what else can be played without emulation. I'm just gonna put out a quick heads up. When I say a game runs perfectly, it means it ran completely how it should. However, if I say a 60 FPS game runs perfectly, even though it looks like 30 FPS in the video, that's because I recorded all this footage at 30 FPS. So while I see 60, you see 30. It's a trade-off for being able to record in 4K, at least with my phone. Also, HackCheat 2 is the app I'm using to get my SNES working with all this emulation. I forgot to mention that. SNESclassicmods.com will tell you how to download HackCheat 2 and get it working with your console for pretty much every tutorial. Let's start with the N64. As of now, the list of N64 games that work on the SNES is pretty small. Hell, they actually included it in the install instructions on SNESclassicmods.com. As you can imagine, I tested a few N64 classics, most of them not on that list. The ones on the list are the only ones that are for sure compatible, presumably. The rest is just a mixed bag. Now keep in mind, all games here are running at the base N64 resolution, which is why you see the jagged edges. Thankfully, it's not lower than that. We were off to a good start with Super Mario 64, as that ran pretty much how the N64 itself would run it, in terms of resolution and frame rate. Now saving using RetroArch's own save states can be very finicky, and I generally would not trust it at the moment. Sometimes saving or loading my state would either work or crash the game. I can for sure say it crashed more times than it worked. Luckily, saving the game normally how you would on a regular N64 works just fine. So as of now, you can play the game like a normal N64 would, without any enhancements, which is good enough for me. But these enhancements would still be greatly appreciated. Things didn't go so well after that. Conker's Bad Fur Day would not boot up at all, and Perfect Dark would be stuck on the loading screen. I finally got to GoldenEye, and while booted up, it was not exactly playable. There were glitches in the sky, and the frame rate was very low, which was really too bad. Doom 64 was a much better situation. The game looked decent and ran at the normal frame rate. The only trouble I was having was saving. I for some reason could not press the button to save that it was binded to. Also FYI, when playing N64 games, you cannot use the SNES Classic's own save system either. I feel if anything, this was probably fault on my end and not the emulators, but it was something to keep in mind still. I played Banjo-Kazooie for a tiny bit, and everything seemed fine at first, but then I noticed that certain textures would quickly fade to black, even if you were not far from them at all. This was definitely an emulation issue. Overall, the experience was very mixed. The best results were Super Mario 64 and Doom 64, assuming you get past the save issue for Doom. The rest were varying degrees of playability. This was the main console I was excited to emulate, and while I am a bit disappointed, I do understand the fact that any N64 game working on the SNES Classic is a miracle in itself. Due to that, I only want to offer encouragement for those currently working on this project, assuming they still are, and just say keep up the good work. It is definitely appreciated. The next console I tested was the PSP. At this point though, I was running out of storage, so it was time to get some more. You can get more SNES Classic storage through an OTG cable and some flash drives. I'll have a tutorial for this in the description. For the PSP, I tested 3 games, and as of now, I can comfortably say that the emulation does need some work. I first booted up Vice City Stories, and sure, the game was running at its native resolution, but to be fair, I was kind of expecting that. But when I actually got to gameplay, the game itself is running at what I believe was half the frame rate of the PSP, if not less. If I stared in a certain direction at times, it would run at the full frame rate, but most of the time, it was way less than stellar. To be fair, Vice City Stories was an open world game, so I figured that was probably why the performance was low, as that would be a lot to load. I then booted up Medal of Honor Heroes 2 and had pretty much the same experience. Again, it was at the native PSP resolution, which I was fine with, but the frame rate was still the same, which meant it was at half speed or less. At certain moments, it would run at the full frame rate, but those were only at specific moments. The last game I tested was God of War Chains of Olympus, and I've only played for about 30 seconds, as by then I had seen enough and deemed it unplayable, which is pretty much the case for the 3 games I tested. Now, there are some PSP games that will run better than others on the SNES Classic, but for the most part, if you want to play PSP on this thing, I would give it some more time. Not that I'm trying to criticize here. Again, the fact that any of these games boot up in the first place is already a big deal. Coding and optimization can take time and effort, and I would hate to discourage those currently working on this and trying to make this all the best experience it can be. To them, I say keep up the good work. There's a very solid foundation that has been created here. Next, we have PS1 games. If this worked out the way it was supposed to, it would mean that on top of a SNES Classic, I could have a PS1 Classic as well, 2 for 1. Also, according to Review Tech USA, the SNES can run PS1 games better than the actual PS1 Classic itself. We would figure this out in due time. So I started with Crash Bandicoot, and when I first booted up, there was some text on the screen saying no BIOS found, please add one for better compatibility. This had me worried at first, but
I then realized though that would not be necessary, as the emulation actually astonished me.
Of course, it was at the original resolution, but it didn't even look that bad on my screen. The frame rate, I believe, was on par with an actual PS1, if not maybe even better, and the controls felt really smooth. I then booted up Spyro and figured out how to set up the Wii controller to function like a DualShock. I then realized that for some good reason, PS1 games can be saved regularly just like any other SNES game, which again was a big plus. At first, every time I reloaded a save, I would have to change the port from standard to DualShock, but I then figured out how to save the controller scheme so I would not need to do that. I spent most of the morning from 10:30 to 12:30
playing both Spyro and Crash, as again, they were perfect experiences.
But I still had one more game to try out, that being Power Slave. And again, it ran perfectly. There were some minor frame drops, but I'm pretty sure that was just due to the base game's frame rate, as it was never unplayable. Ultimately, it ran nicely like an actual PS1, another flawless experience. As a bonus, I ran Medal of Honor and Silent Hill, again perfect experiences. Pretty ironic how this thing can act as a homemade PS1 classic, even if it's not really that genuine. This by far was the best performance I'd seen on a console that was not the SNES. Now this alone would make hacking your system worth it, but we were still not done yet. The GBA was next up, and for this, I did something a little more interesting. You see, I don't have much connection or experience with the GBA. I know it was a great console with a lot of great games, but there's not much that I personally want to play or see run on the SNES Mini. So instead, I did games that were considered graphically intensive by the GBA standards. These were the kinds of games where almost everything would be 3D and in some sort of real time, and also games that make you wonder how the hell does this run on such a small and old device. Suffice to say, there were plenty of games that filled that criteria. First was Duke Nukem.
Now this is honestly a great GBA game, as not only does it look good for the platform that it's on, but also is just a good game in general.
And when I first booted up, it of course ran at the original GBA resolution, and it was a little off-throwing at first, but the more I played Duke Nukem, the more I started to ignore it and just get carried away. Again, it's an impressive technological feat for the GBA. But how did it run? As far as I can tell, it ran perfectly. It matched the GBA's own frame rate really well, and never seemed to dip or run poorly, which I feel makes a lot of sense for the GBA, as it's the GBA. You don't need the most power to run its games or emulate them. Next we have Hot Wheels Stunt Track Challenge.
And welcome to Stunt Track Challenge. The rules of the show are simple.
And while it makes it seem like shovelware at first sight, it still does offer some really nice looking visuals and graphics, not to mention an art style that fits the rest of the presentation.
It's all a lot more impressive than it should be. But then I booted up V-Rally 3, and goddamn, if there was ever a game that could show off the GBA's power, it would be this. There were tons of 3D elements to the game, mainly with the environments, which all seemed complex and varied in a manner that would have you in disbelief if someone said that this was on the GBA. The game ran perfectly. I did not see any noticeable performance drops, and the whole thing felt really smooth to control. I wasn't even using the Wii Pro controller, but instead the base SNES Classic controller, and it held together really nicely. I ended up getting carried away again, and cleared quite a lot of tracks before I decided to go back to writing. I even tried that GBA Quake-ish tech demo, which ran well enough, but it was pushing the GBA emulation to its limits. If you want to know more about this, I'll leave a link in the description for it. Also, saving the game was not an issue in the slightest, as like the PlayStation, it can make use of the SNES's own save system, which believe me is a huge quality of life improvement.
The next console I had was the Dreamcast. Now getting this to work was a little difficult at first, as I was not really sure what files to use or not, but finally I got it all straightened out and booted up Soldier of Fortune.
Unfortunately though, no pun intended, it was not that good of an experience.
When it came to the more advanced graphics, such as mirrors and certain particle effects, there was a lot of glitchiness to it all. It's as if they were all just spazzing out. Now I would not have minded this, but the frame rate was really the game-killing experience, as I don't even think it ran at half the frame rate it was supposed to. It was too bad because I was almost really enjoying it. It felt smooth to play despite running pretty poorly. There was an opportunity for fun here had the frame rate worked better. Next up was Mach-N X, and after getting through the first cutscene, I feel the game ran better than Soldier of Fortune, but was still not quite at the proper frame rate. Still though, it was a major improvement, and I felt it was a lot closer to a more playable experience. Had the game ran just a little bit better, it probably would have been fully playable, if not at least mostly playable. Aside from the frame rate, I didn't see any issues with the graphics themselves, at least none that were very obvious. While far from perfect, Mach-N X was definitely a big improvement from Soldier of Fortune, and also a huge step in the right direction. Before I moved on into the next game, I tried saving my state using RetroArch itself, but I was only able to save. Once I loaded, it unfortunately crashed the game.
Also, saving my state with the SNES Mini's own save system would not work either, which is too bad because it is a very convenient system. I finally tried Rayman 2, and things looked promising at first. No graphical glitches and the frame rate seemed to run okay, but then the first cutscene played, and the auto seemed choppy, which was consistent throughout the whole experience, might I add, and is something I should have mentioned sooner. I started playing the first section, and while I feel this ran the best of the games I tested, I still think it was just a little bit off. It's as if it was a tiny bit slower than it should have been. Still though, again, it ran the best out of everything I tried. When I got to especially intensive moments, that's when the frame rate really started to chug, unfortunately. I also noticed graphical glitching when it came to the water, and that was probably due to the fact that it was just a little bit more dynamic than the rest of the ground. After a couple minutes of playing, I had seen everything I had needed to. Again, it was almost playable. The emulation probably just needs some more tweaking to get everything right, but that may be the equivalent of pulling teeth in terms of development. So as of now, everything I've tested so far has been brought to us not only by a pretty dedicated community, but also RetroArch. As if you cannot tell by now, all of these emulators use RetroArch as a base, and have cores as well as plugins taken from other already existing emulators. At least I think that's how it works. It's up to the fans to figure out how to put this all together properly. But there are some games that we can play on here that, as of now, I do not think need RetroArch. At least not in the same vein as emulating them. Well, 3 more games actually. Those games being Half-Life, Doom, and Quake. I feel like those are the standard homebrew games. When it comes to any device being hacked, you would usually see one of those 3, and if not, then all 3. First day of doing this was a disaster. I started with Doom and tried both the tutorial from SNESmods.com and one from Patent Plays. I had no luck whatsoever. I figured there was some step I was missing or something I was doing wrong, as no one else seemed to have the problems I was having. After some time, I ended up ditching Doom for now and decided to try Quake and Half-Life. Half-Life I cannot get to boot up for the life of me. However, Quake was able to boot up for me, but there's a huge asterisk there. It nearly destroyed the system while it was running. It was incredibly glitchy in ways that I didn't even think were possible. At first, it kept switching back and forth from the game to the SNES Classic menu at a speed that I had no idea was possible for the system itself. I then shut the thing off and the game kept running. It kept playing despite being turned off, and it would no longer show the SNES Classic menu. Like, how the hell was that even possible? Suffice to say, this would not do. I immediately started backtracking and reinstalling to try and figure out where I went wrong. I still wanted to stick with Quake, as this was the furthest I'd actually gotten with any of the games. I do need to state that the HackChi resource website, which would be where most of these files were downloaded from, was completely inaccessible, at least on my end. I got the proper Quake and Half-Life files from external sources, but Doom was a pain in the ass, as I could not find it anywhere else. This meant that I could most likely not install it properly until I did. Then I found something really interesting that's going to require me to step away from the project at hand. I searched up HackChi Resources website down on Google, and it led me to a Reddit post titled Big Announcement, HackChi Resources is moving on. So likewise, I clicked the post and explained that HackChi Resources will no longer be known as HackChi Resources. It then stated that they rebranded to ModMyClassic, which of course meant that this was a totally new domain, meaning that all the old links leading to HackChi Resources were now broken, which is why I could not access what I needed to. Well, supposedly broken. And for your information, a lot of different tutorials used HackChi Resources for different files and supplied links to HackChi Resources, links that supposedly no longer work now. I'm sure the content was saved, but still, it would have been handy to have known this a lot sooner. Anyways, I then searched up modmyclassic.com. After digging around, I found a link that was sort of like a Wikipedia for ModMyClassic, and this specific page was centered around SNES Classic
exports. I scrolled down to Doom and clicked Hack Cheat Doom, and I looked up to see that the URL was going to Hack Cheat Resources, the site that I already deemed unreachable at the time. I was exhausted from this, so I decided to take a break and deal with it the next day, as I still had a few ideas about what I could do to fix my issues. The next thing I did was reach out to Mod My Classic Discord. I typed the following message: does anyone have the files for Hack Cheat Doom? I cannot access the website currently, so I was wondering if anyone has an external link. 5 minutes later, someone responded and said, isn't it there in the KMFD mod hub? I see it there, I gotta go to bed though, best of luck. What he was referring to was actually the same tutorial SNESclassicmods.com had used, which again did not work for me. Also, don't get the wrong idea from this. They genuinely are a helpful community. That fix the guy gave in a normal circumstance should have worked, but for me specifically, it was not. Ideally though, if you do have questions and cannot find an answer anywhere else, ask the Discord community, as they usually are of decent help. Despite that, I decided to sort of try that method again, but change up what I could. I primarily focused on Doom and Quake, and basically I would install the main games themselves through SNES Classic Mods method, but try to download whatever cores I could. Then bind the two together, sort of. This is actually what you have to do with any ROM being ran on the SNES Classic. You have to bind it to the core system that the game is meant for. I did this whole process and tried booting up Quake, as this I had the most faith in. It said RetroArch is loading, and then went right back to the menu screen. The funny thing is, I didn't know if this was more progress or less progress than my last attempt. I even tried reinstalling RetroArch Neo, which according to Patent Plays, is necessary for running these games, albeit the tutorials and methods vary extensively. After some fiddling, I still had nothing, so I decided to restart entirely from scratch, this time reinstalling Quake. I installed its cores and everything all from Hack Cheat 2 like I did earlier, and this time it worked. It just worked. I don't know what changed at all. The process was exactly the same, but somehow it just all worked. The game was running flawlessly with no issues. It was only the shareware version, but I did not care in the slightest. I was just happy it worked at all. But the game ran at a full 60 frames. Sure, the resolution was not too high, but it didn't matter. It ran perfectly well. I even turned on what enhancements I could, such as smooth animations. I was just happy to make some real progress here. I played pretty far into the first episode and got as far as I could until I was stuck. And by stuck I meant until I kept dying. It's all just so great and rewarding after having struggled with this for so long. The game even works in third person mode. But alas, I had to get back to work, and I had the choice of either continuing with Doom or Half-Life, which was a choice that really had me stumped if anything. So I tried Doom. I installed it from Hack Cheat itself, the app, not the website. I linked up the necessary cores and it worked. It just worked. Again, I don't know what I changed or did differently. It probably had something to do with the cores, but it worked and I was happy. The game appeared to be running at full speed with no hiccups. It was even able to use the SNES Classic's own save system, which is something that Quake could not do. Again, this is only the shareware version, but it really did not matter to me. I was just happy to be able to genuinely play this on my SNES. And yes, this is 100 times better than the base SNES Doom. The only downside with this version of the game is that the controls are hard to come to grips with. I'm not quite sure how to rebind them. They're not awful, but I wish there was a bit more compatibility in terms of that aspect. Still, a great port nonetheless. The last game to try and get working was Half-Life, and if this did not work, that would be okay, because hey, 2 out of the 3 ain't bad. And alas, Half-Life did not work. It was simply not meant to be at this point. I had tried a myriad of different things at this point, but I could simply just not get it to work. I had tried different orders, different files, different everything. But unfortunately, again, it just didn't work. Believe it or not, the intro of this video was actually supposed to be me playing Half-Life, not Quake. I wrote the intro out as so, but that's before I actually tried this whole process. At the time, I just assumed it would all work, as I figured it would be a smooth process. If anything, the version of Zash 3D I was using, which is what is needed to run Half-Life on different various devices, was probably not the best version. It was some random version from this video in particular. The real version is meant to be downloaded from hackcheatresources.com, which again has been inaccessible for some time now. Don't quote me on that last bit, I actually have no idea where I got that information from. Maybe there's a link out there for Half-Life on the SNES that leads to Hack Cheat Resources, I don't know. As of now, I cannot find any proof of that, so I don't know what I was talking about. I would imagine that if there was a download there, then it would probably work a lot better. But hey, like I said, 2 out of 3 is not bad, especially because just before that, it was 0 out of 3. So I'll just summarize the games that did work. Doom and Quake ran extremely well. Both seemed to run and stay at 60 FPS, and turning on whatever enhancements I could didn't seem to kill the frame rate at all. This, if anything, was a nice way to end the testing as a whole. It was a lot of fun, but more importantly, it also means that my SNES Classic is now a PS1 Classic. You could say the same for the GBA, but I would rather keep those games portable for now. And yeah, if none of these consoles I tried had really worked, at the very least, I would have been able to expand my base SNES game library. But luckily, I was able to do more than that. To those who have developed proper working emulators for the SNES Classic, you guys did an amazing job. And to those whose emulators still need some work, please keep up the good work. Again, the last thing I would want to do is discourage those just trying to help and make this a better platform. Again, to those people, just keep doing what you're doing. I'd imagine a lot of the fans are all rooting for you. Overall, testing this thing was fun, even if it was a little tiresome at times, having to replug the SNES back into the computer for every little change. Still though, I was glad to get some real extra use out of this old plug-and-play system, and I was especially impressed with what had been accomplished so far. But I wanted to actually get in touch with the SNES Classic modding community. I wanted to see the lay of the land, or if it was still being worked on by the said. This seemed a little difficult at first, as it was more of a question of what angle do I approach from. There were many places to get started in, and a lot of people I could contact, so I did my best to backtrack. And the first person I decided to look up was Daniel. On SNESClassicMods.com, if you look at any tutorial here, there will be a link to download HackG2, which again is the program you need to use if you want to even remotely hack your device. That link actually takes you to a GitHub page, which shows that the file had been uploaded by a user named DanTheMan87. He had some pretty decent stats and achievements on this site, but he also had a Ko-Fi link, which would allow one to directly donate and message Daniel. You can imagine what I did next. I sent him a $4 donation and said, "Hey Daniel, I see you're the creator of HackG2CE, and I was wondering if you'd be able to answer some questions about the SNES Classic homebrew community currently." I just realized I should have said modding community instead of homebrew community because they aren't quite the same thing, and I'm more so chasing the modding community here, as I'm making a report about said community. My email is, "I wanted to say don't feel duped into doing this because I sent a donation, and feel free to answer at your own discretion, but Ko-Fi will only allow so much in one message." I sent it to him and proceeded to find the next person on my list, which was KMFD. His name was everywhere on the HackG app, so I figured it would be best to contact him next. A simple Google search led me to another impressive GitHub page for a person named Kylan K. According to the said page, he apparently has 30 plus years in the emulation scene, which is no small feat. He had some pretty cool achievements as well. I checked KMFD's as well as Dan the Man's contributions, and they were both active on GitHub up to February 2023. These would be the people to contact. KMFD proved to be a little bit more difficult, as while I'm sure he would love to talk about his work, reaching him could be a little bit awkward. GitHub does not allow for a direct contact to its users, so that ended up being a dead end. He also had a YouTube channel, but I felt if anything this should be used as more of a last resort. I felt a direct message would be a lot more professional than a YouTube comment. But then I stumbled upon something interesting. Out of curiosity, I searched up Kylan K KMFD and found a Reddit post from him. This, if anything, would probably be the best way to contact him. It was uploaded to r/PlayStation Classic, and to be honest, I'm not surprised that he would have an upload there. It honestly seemed right up his alley, so I did my best to contact him through that. Luckily, there was a direct chat option, so I typed up the following message. "Hey KMFD, it seems that you played a big hand in the SNES Classic homebrew scene. Would you be willing to answer some questions about the homebrew community for the said console? I'm currently doing a report on it, and I would love some more insight. Please message me back if you have any interest. Thank you very much." I sent that message and waited for the 2 responses. About 4 days later, KMFD contacted me first. He said, "Where does this all come from, interest-wise, if you don't mind filling me in?" That's a good question, as there were quite a lot of motives for my interest. I responded like so. "I don't mind at all. I've been a long-time user of homebrew over the years, and I mainly use it for my PS Vita. However, every time I use homebrew, I download whatever app I need and then go on my way. This time, I would like to know some of the people that work behind the scenes to expand my console's usage, but also give them some public credit as well." I had sent it his way and waited for a response again. Unfortunately, Daniel had still yet to contact me back. On the positive side, KMFD responded with, "Homebrew is a different area than I work in, however. I don't specifically work on homebrew games. I primarily work on emulators that can run homebrew, but I focus on working on them for lower spec platforms that would ordinarily have issues running them. Many developers work with a workflow that is more up to date with current PC standards. I'm still stuck a bit in the past and fight against the mode current to pull off a little magic here and there where applicable as far as what can and cannot run on these low specs. I didn't even realize what I got wrong with homebrew and emulation until after he pointed it out. I was so used to using the two together that I had mixed them up. But he was right, they were pretty different things when you got down to brass tacks. I then responded with, I see. Thank you for clarifying that bit of information for me. Well, despite your work using past methods, it clearly shines through and gives consoles like the SNES Classic a lot more functionality, which is no small feat. Nonetheless, if you do officially say yes to a small interview, I would be totally willing to do it all here in this very chat. He then said, if you have some questions you'd like to ask, go for it. You have to remember, homebrew has very open-ended interpretations. And that's very true. The base definition of homebrew is software not meant to be on there in the first place. I replied with, I certainly will. 1. How'd you get involved with the emulation scene? And 2. How'd you get involved with the emulation in the SNES Classic? Sometime later he responded and began to tell a story. Emulation scene I was involved in as far back as the 1990s, when I realized that developers genuinely release source code with public distribution licenses. I started adaptively learning to better understand various scripting languages and modes thereof which were used, such as C++, Java, Python, Bash, and so on. I pretty much learned as I went, pulling off just what I needed to for that moment in time. But then, moving forward, gain knowledge in all of the preceding has helped immensely with better performance/speed on platforms that truly suffer from lower spec hardware syndrome. I made a surround like Maze game using BASIC way back, but only dabbled slightly in game development.
because it is extremely tedious and not as fun as actually playing the games. I prefer to try to better how the games play than make them. You can spend 100 hours to luckily get 1 to 60 minutes of actual gameplay. Just look at RPG Maker, a user-friendly toolset engine, as well as the Open BOR engine, both of which can allow about anyone to make their own games, with reasonable expectations. You also have creation tools in Little Big Planet, Trials games, and so on. I just never had the patience to get too involved in these. I did play around with NetEuros, the PS1 development system, as that was pretty nifty for creating shmups. If you see my YouTube channel, you know I'm a shmup fan. As far as SNES Classic development, I'm an IT tech in real life. On GitHub, when people opened issues, I helped resolve them, relating to hack cheat. This led to me becoming more involved in hack cheat, more so the cores/RetroArch portion, as well as helping pinpoint bugs in hack cheat and helping with potential solutions to said problems. Even something as simple as a read-only conflict could lead to hell when it comes to emulation. Cluster M made a user-friendly hack cheat 2 off of Mad Monkey's original hack cheat hack. I initially kept in contact with Cluster M, which led later on to me working directly with Mad Monkey, whom I actually met in a funny and interesting way. Someone was saying 7-zip games don't work on their cores, and I brought to their attention that 7-zip only worked on later MAME and FBA cores. Mad Monkey chimed in, and we struck it off, and chatted about games, etc. We wondered how fun it would be to play Rock and Roll Racing for the SNES with a CD soundtrack, with real songs, and that is what blossomed into him pulling off a USB host, ability to run games from flash drive via an OTG cable. Many milestones have occurred since then, and when Cluster M took a break for a while, Dan the Man 827 wanted to add additions, joined our Discord, and I was able to get Cluster M to come back, Mad Monkey to join, and a few other devs. The rest is mod history. This story was gold in terms of understanding the behind the scenes work on Little Console. Essentially, he had kind of known his way around hack cheat due to his IT experience, and this made him fit right in with the major people of the community. Then, of course, they rigged their SNES with an OTG cable, which provides so much more in terms of accessibility. If anything, Mad Monkey and KMFD had really met accidentally through coincidence. But honestly, I think everyone who's ever modded their SNES is pretty glad they did. I mean, that's such a heavy moment considering what their future work would spark together. Just to make sure we were on the same page, I confirmed the info with him and proceeded to ask the next few questions. The next thing I asked was, is hack cheat's community still working on hack cheat itself, as well as the various cores it uses to emulate games? I would imagine there's only so much one could do with the SNES Classic's limited hardware, but I would still love to know. This was a very pivotal question actually, as throughout this whole process, that being the testing as well, I continue to wonder, is this still being worked on? Or did the community make it as far as they possibly could, before ultimately having to throw in the towel due to hardware constraints?
So yes, I weighed his answer with a decent amount of anticipation. The response was, I'm the primary one that works on the cores with Mad Monkey and Dan the Man 827 doing the groundwork for hack cheat. We collaborate to try to keep them as compatible as possible. If you've seen in my YouTube videos, you'd see that progress has been quite extensive in the hack cheat community over the last couple of months. There's also plenty more to do. Literally anything that someone suggests or imagines can potentially be done. So is anything I can dream up. Nothing is impossible within reason. If we had an attitude that things were impossible, we wouldn't be running Dreamcast or Nintendo DS on the mini classics. Looking at his channel, you can see plenty of hack cheat progress on display, with it being used on many different consoles, which was nice as it really did show there's a lot of true dedication. Thank you very much for all your time. This means a ton to me as a fan of the console itself, but also as someone who enjoys all the extra work behind it. This whole thing provided a lot of great perspective on the work behind the console, and really everyone on your end breathed a lot of extra life into it. I really am thankful for your time as well as cooperation. You made this report a hell of a lot better. Overall, this was way above and beyond what I had initially planned for this report. Hell, at first I was kind of reluctant to actually do it in the first place, but I'm glad I did. Originally, it was going to be a video of me just testing the SNES itself, but involved into quite a lot more than that, at least to me. So yeah, this report could have easily just been a test of things, but instead, I gained a lot more knowledge of the work that goes on behind the scenes. It was a lot more eye-opening than I previously would have thought. Yes, while it took extra work and time, it was definitely worth it to go about things the way I did. Go after those eye-opening experiences in life. Learn about the people behind some of the things you're interested in, especially if it's technology related. There are plenty of hidden stories out there that provide all sorts of great knowledge that can make a video or an experience like this all that much better. But you can only learn if you go after those experiences. Whether you try to research or even reach out, you can end up in all sorts of places, some better than others. I definitely owe a special thanks to KMFD for agreeing to this interview. He gave me so much more information than I could have asked for, and I appreciate every bit of it. I never heard back from Dan the Man, which is totally fine. I'm sure he's busy with who knows what nowadays. It would make sense if he just didn't have the time at the moment. I do hope he put the $4 I sent to good use. Believe it or not, interviewing everyone here was really an afterthought, but I want to make this report more than just a test of things, and interviewing KMFD made that work almost perfectly. I hope you enjoyed the support. A lot of work was put into it as well as a lot of time. If you want to see more videos from me, then do subscribe, but I should let you know they will not always be of this caliber. If everything goes to plan, the next video you'll see of me will involve the Medal of Honor series, but that won't be for some time. Really quickly, believe it or not, I actually started writing this video all the way back on January 11th. I had a feeling this was going to take me a lot of time, and clearly I was not wrong. I think this is the longest I've ever worked on a video for. I mean, between writing, recording, and filming as well as editing, that whole process has taken months. I'm about to finish my second semester of college, and I started writing this thing before it even began. A lot of time was put into this, and I'm truly hoping that it paid off. Basically, I'm saying I hope you really enjoyed it. So much has happened in between now and then, and looking back at this moment from when I first started, it's something else. It really is. Editing this thing has really been on and off. Sometimes I'd be full on into it, other times it would just be a drag. It really depends on how I felt that week. As something bad would happen, I would be completely thrown off, and it takes some effort to get back on, honestly. It takes a real push to get back into that editing space or even working space. And luckily, I made that push more than enough times to pull through. Nonetheless, thank you all so much for watching, and thank you all for your support. Just a little bit can go a long way here. Before we finish, there is one last note I have to make. Over a year ago, I made a video titled Look Back at COD Zombies on Mobile. Since then, a viewer has reached out to me regarding a project they are working on, which had to do with the subject of that video. It's a port of a game. They wanted to show it to me and basically asked if I'd be interested in taking a look. I, of course, said yes. Basically, if any of you are, say, working on a port of a game, for example, say you're working on a port of Medal of Honor 1 for PC or something like that, feel free to contact me through the YouTube comments if you'd like me to cover and make a video on it, or at least have me look into it. I'll then extend a Discord alt or some other way of contact. I'm mostly interested in covering and making videos on ports of games, not exactly indie games in general, as I don't typically review games. So yeah, if you have a port indie project you're working on, let me know and I will take a look at least. However, of course, I'm not interested in every game or every port of a game, do keep that in mind. Essentially, I will for sure take a look and I'll determine if it's something I would like to make a video on. As of now, I have a little over 300 subscribers, so do keep in mind that the current exposure of that project may not be the highest with me. That also partly depends on the project itself. I just wanted to push that bit out for you all, and please do not be shy about it.